Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session at the Data Science and Data Engineering series. Today, we are going to talk about how AI strategy building blocks could be used for organizations who are trying to understand, adopt, and scale AI solutions. We have Calvin Tennakoon from Deloitte, Canada, where he's a manager in the Omnia AI strategy team. Kelvin specializes in developing AI and data strategies and products for customers of Deloitte. Kelvin has a master's degree in information from the University of Toronto and a degree in English from the University of Guelph. So without further ado, let me introduce Kelvin. Hi, Kelvin. How are you?
Hello. I am well.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for coming over at the Data Science and Data Engineering series.
Okay. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So without further ado, let's go to your presentation.
Perfect. So hopefully you can all see the screen that's being presented right now. So the purpose of today's presentation is really different from what you may have heard in the past within the context of this forum or within the context of this meetup. Where in the past you may have heard about, I would say, deep dives on the nuts and bolts of solutioning an AI product. Today, I want to shift the focus a little bit and actually take a step back. I want to talk about some of the practical applications and the practical problems organizations face when they're actually looking to adopt AI solutions. This is going to be a very holistic view of real life scenarios that I've seen clients face on, hey, the AI product works, but something is not fitting or something's not working within the context of our organization. I'll be grounding a lot of these scenarios and a lot of the solutions here against what I'm calling the AI building blocks needed to support AI. So maybe taking a quick step back, to tell you a little bit about myself, or a little bit more about myself. So I am a manager within our Deloitte Omnia AI team. My specialty, my experience, and my passion is really on the AI strategy and the AI product management. So this is dealing with the first few steps of a client's journey around AI. So making sure that they are aware of what AI is, its applicable to its application to their organization, identifying the business challenges and the opportunities relevant to them, and seeing where that aligns to AI, and proving it out using some kind of POC or some kind of product. What I've noticed, and what's kind of proven across the industry, is that if you bring a forward-facing strategy and you don't prove it, you oftentimes lose a lot of the momentum. So the whole purpose of my role within Deloitte and what I do with a lot of clients across a variety of different industries is come in and I'll do the workshops, I'll do the viewpoints of how they can use AI. I'll identify, again, I'll explain further, but the building blocks they need to deploy and scale AI. And I own that journey in the sense of proving it out within some kind of product or some kind of POC. So I've been doing this for about 7+ years within the context of Deloitte and within the context even before that. The reason I want to highlight here both my master's in information management and my undergrad in English is because, again, to my earlier point, AI within the context of an organization or within the application for any company is so much more than just the technology. It's dealing with the fears, the aspirations, the market hype, the processes. It's dealing with so much more than just deploying a tool or automating a particular service. Being able to bridge the tech solution to the business and being able to communicate AI in a very articulate way is oftentimes half the battle we have with our clients. Maybe not necessarily battle, but it's oftentimes the challenge we work to solve. And again, this will be related quite nicely to the building blocks we see in the future of this presentation. So to give some context on Deloitte Omnia AI, Deloitte, as many of you may know, has a lot of different services. So we do consulting, we do accounting, and a number of other different elements as well. Within the consulting practice, there is a team called Deloitte Omnia AI, and this is the team that deals with the end-to-end client journey around AI. So as you'll continuously hear me highlight in this presentation, AI is more than just a solution. It is the implications on your people, your process, your tech, and your data as well. So being able to offer end-to-end client services means that we are at the beginning doing the workshops, the ideation sessions, the problem solving of what their AI vision and strategy will be. And then next is moving more into the enterprise application and scalability of AI. So being able to look at the data governance and the data maturity of an organization and both assess it and benchmark it, but also resolve it and improve it so that AI will actually be viable. And this is all then funneling towards your actual model development or configuration. So being able to work with our clients to either buy an AI solution or to build an AI solution is key in some of the products we build. And of course, horizontal to all of this is the governance and the ethics we work with our clients to resolve. So making sure that they are aware of the regulatory considerations they need when deploying AI, making sure our customers are aware of the consumer ethics and the consumer concerns, or even actually employee concerns around AI and automation is critical to owning that end-to-end client journey. So whereas my presentation today will focus on the strategy and the building blocks, Deloitte and Omnia AI as a whole does a lot more than that. Looking at the agenda of what I want to talk about today, again, I really want to quite briefly talk about the market hype and the market potential around AI. This is a meetup and a forum dedicated to AI, so I don't want to spend too much time here. But I do want to highlight how there are some differences and a lack of continuity with how people are defining AI and how that translates to how they build their strategy and the gaps they face there. I want to define the concept of the AI building blocks and how that works within the context of an organization, and take you through two specific examples of how I've seen clients deal with different types of building blocks, so data and strategy. And finally, I'll wrap it up and address and answer any questions anyone on the line has on building your strategy, building products, and building a sustainable AI practice within your organization. So, again, quite briefly, I do want to take a moment to just talk about the current AI market adoption. AI, as we can recognize as members of this forum and meetup, is continually growing in its hype and market adoption. There are a number of different reasons for this, whether it is from the academic side and the recent breakthroughs we've had through machine learning or deep learning, or whether it's through the more tangible business value that's been recently proven in the marketplace of organizations being able to have a breakthrough of, hey, generating new client insights or generating new products and services or saving money through AI. The problem around AI right now is that there is a variety of different perspectives around it. So whether this is from the academic side and the cutting edge AI tech we hear about, whether this is about the media and the potential fears that are being raised around automation and job loss, or whether it's from movies or video games of robots and different applications that may not necessarily be prevalent today, but are forward-facing and potentially confusing to consumers. Ultimately, what this means for our customers is that there's not, or there's very rarely a very consistent definition of what AI means to them. To better explain this, there's like a quick and simple framework I pulled together here on the different ways people are defining AI. And they're defining AI differently because, like I said, there's external influences that they're seeing from the media, from academics, from whatever. And there's also internal influences that they're dealing with. So depending on the maturity of an organization, or depending on the aspirations of an organization, AI can mean different things. So if an organization is very cutting edge and very exploratory, they may absolutely define AI as general intelligence. This may be an organization that wants to recreate the human brain, and they may want to truly build your AGI scenarios that you hear about. In a vast majority of the time, we do see clients that are dealing with more problem-focused AI instances, where they're either just looking to automate a particular service that was paper-based or very manual before, or they're just looking for an opportunity to gain hype and a catalyst for innovation and change within their organization, and they see AI being that. We, of course, work with very tech-focused organizations as well that may use AI and machine learning interchangeably, that are very technology-focused and saying, hey, we don't consider this AI unless it is being able to improve upon itself without human intervention. Ultimately, the narrative we take with a lot of our clients is that it's okay that there isn't one single definition of AI across the organization. The most important part is really that they're finding actual AI value. So in the wide breadth of what AI can do, from natural language processing, from image recognition, from deep learning, I would argue that there's a much smaller fraction of what is actually applicable to a business. So a business may not necessarily need a chatbot solution, even though it could be considered or argued to be AI. What we argued, or what we help guide our clients to do, is instead focus on the small sliver of what actual AI value is. And that allows them to actually ground their definition accordingly. So that way they'll be able to say, hey, for us, we are a very problem-focused organization, or we want to use AI to cut costs, or we want to use AI to do exploratory learning about our customers. Let's define it this way, and let's then use specific AI solutions accordingly. The implication that a variety of AI solutions or AI definitions mean is that there's often not a consistent way that organizations can test, prove, and grow AI across the organization. And again, I raise this question to highlight that it is not just from a technology perspective. To test, prove, and grow AI requires a variety of different implications across your organization. And those implications are how I typically call out the building blocks of your organization. So the concept of a building block is really being able to look at your organization and categorize it into what I would do 5 different ways. So what are the people components of your organization, or the technology processes of your organization, the processes of your organization, the data of your organization, and the strategy of your organization. Being able to reorganize or reclassify what you do across these 5 building blocks is really important, because it'll allow you to prioritize certain outcomes depending on your AI values or your AI vision. So let's double click on this a little bit more here. So as I mentioned before, the 5 different AI building blocks, or the 5 different building blocks of any organization, can be broken down to people, process, tech, data, and strategy. So people are the change champions. These are your leadership. These are your employees. These are every component of your organization that is touching the people that are doing something. The process building blocks are around what you're actually doing. So these are your change management strategies. These are your op model design. These are your socialization, your interaction, and your governance. all of that would be grouped into the kind of process building blocks you need for your organization to function. Your technology building blocks are dealing with your cloud environment, your software and your hardware needed to actually support the products and services that you're providing. And the data building blocks are dealing with either the data that you're generating or the data that you're using to function. So again, it works across your technology, it works across your processes and your people. And your strategy building blocks are your views and your perspectives and your action plans of what you're going to be doing next. So an example of each one of these would be what you see on your screen right now. What I would highlight here is that your building blocks of your organization come in a variety of different types. So what you see here is not an exhaustive list, but it's also not to say that you need to use every one of these building blocks. The AI building blocks allow you to say, hey, if we want to be forward-facing, if we want to be very innovative and change-oriented and agile, what do we need to do to support that? Do we need to have very strong change management? Do we need to have a very strong socialization strategy so that our people are not scared when we're adopting cutting-edge AI solutions? Probably. If you are a more risk-adverse organization, you would need to have a strong perspective on how you're going to govern your AI solutions, how you're going to respect consumer privacy. What you see right now is a way of organizing it and a way of saying, hey, if we define AI this way, or if we're going to deploy an AI solution, what do we need as our foundation? What do we need across people, process, tech, data, and strategy to make sure that, let's say day one, we've turned on this product, that our people will support it, that they're not going to be scared of it, that they're going to be trained to support it, that we have the appropriate reporting process on it, that we have the appropriate socialization process on it, that we have the correct data needed to grow our model, to improve our model, that we have the correct DevOps pipeline, that we have the correct technology infrastructure needed, and that we have the correct strategy to, first of all, validate that the product was in alignment to some kind of goal and some kind of aspiration, and that we can connect it to a broader ecosystem of your data strategy, of your fintech strategy, or some kind of ecosystem play that you're looking for. So what I want to start doing in the next half of this presentation is to start to go through different scenarios that I've seen clients deal with within the context of, we'll pick two of these. So we'll focus on the data category and we'll focus on the strategy category. During the Q&A, we could definitely talk about the people, process, and tech as well. But let's talk about how I've seen other clients deal with their data building blocks within the context of their AI aspirations. And let's talk about how our clients have dealt with their strategy considerations within the context of their AI aspirations. So first, sample building blocks. So I'm going to take data as the broad category here, and within my scenario, I will try and double click on here's how the client had to pick specific data building blocks that they needed to mature based off their AI definition, their AI aspiration. So I worked with, as a quick story, I worked with a client a few years ago to help develop an enterprise AI strategy. So this client was, I would say, arguably at the peak of the AI hype, and they said, hey, we are a large organization, and we envision AI being at the core of everything we do. We see AI as the big driver of how we're going to cut costs, how we're going to identify new client services and products. We want to ensure as an organization that anything we do with AI can be applied at the enterprise level and can be a core component of all of our services and functions. So that was great. It was very aspirational, and it was really refreshing that they wanted to take a big step into the world of AI. So we did a number of sessions with them to say, okay, let's double click a little bit more on what your AI aspirations, your values will be. So we were going through that process, and we were getting a lot of buy-in at the leadership level that this is going to be their big play. They were going to be a leading AI enterprise organization. Now, this is an organization, where this is a company that has existed for many years. So they are quite mature in their timeline. They're quite mature in their processes. What we did recognize, though, as soon as we wanted to start actioning it, was that they didn't have a strong data maturity. Their data maturity was fragmented across the organization. They did not have similar or consistent processes on how they were labeling data, with how they were validating the quality of the data, how they were sharing data and protecting it. It was not uniform and not consistent. And what we called out right away was that, hey, if you want to have an enterprise AI solution, you need to be grounded against an enterprise data governance strategy. So we actually had to take a step back and say, hey, before we go big bang here, we need to prioritize that your AI enterprise AI solution will work. So we actually had to take a step back and say, before we go big bang with AI strategy and this AI product, let's actually shift and focus on maturing our data governance. Let's use our North Star of being a leading AI company as a way of inspiring people to fix their data, to improve their data maturity, to improve their data governance. This is really important because with a lot of companies and a lot of applications across the industry, we see people go big with AI and it fails. And then people don't want to touch AI again because they made their big bet, it didn't work, so they've been disillusioned, disheartened with AI. Oftentimes, when we talk to our clients and our customers about AI, the first thing we say is that the first one has to work. It doesn't matter if it is tiny, it doesn't matter if it provides very little value, it just needs to work. What that allows you to do is to start to pick up momentum and start to increase your scope, to increase your complexity. Because at that point, people knows that it worked. People can validate, hey, at one point it worked for us, and we're going to increase our risk and increase the complexity of our AI solution. But if you go big bang and if it doesn't work, people will be less likely to give you the money, to give you the resources, to spend the time really on trying again. So improving their data maturity and improving their data governance became the big play for this organization. Even though it was not directly AI related, it was implicitly going to allow them to get to their AI end state. So we started going through the process of saying, okay, to improve your data governance and to improve your data strategy, what are the big weaknesses here? So we started identifying a lack of ownership of data across the organization, the lack of an enterprise taxonomy, the lack of consistent data quality rules. And we started saying, okay, if these are going to be our weakest building blocks, let's make them our best building blocks. Let's see the work it takes to shift the culture across the organization, to identify data owners or to mature a data steward community. Let's see the work required to build a strong foundation in our data quality rules, so that regardless of the department you're in, you're talking about and managing data similarly. Again, it's not a core data focus, but what it allowed the organization to do was say, hey, to be an enterprise AI organization, we need to fix these are basically our dirty data. We need to fix our pipes here. We need to stop using Band-Aid solutions. So the slide you see right now is something I just pulled online. It's a great way of categorizing your data building blocks. There's great data governance frameworks that you can say, hey, for metadata, for data lifecycle, for data architecture. How are we doing? How are we benchmarking ourselves across the industry? And are we comfortable that when we look to deploy or design an AI product, that we're not going to have any weak chains here? Again, this is important for a few reasons. Because AI is still largely unproven in the market, you want to ensure that from both a regulatory perspective and a consumer perspective, that you are protected. If you are using customer data or customer protected data in your AI solution that hasn't been tagged properly, that will create a privacy risk, and you will have regulatory scrutiny, and you will have bad marketing, bad PR, bad relationships because of it. If your AI solution is holding on to data longer than it should and you're not disposing of it correctly, again, it's not implicitly because of your AI product, but because your AI product is a catalyst of everything you're doing, from an innovation, from a new service, it will reflect poorly from your customers saying, hey, they held on to my data for too long, or hey, they did not respect my privacy with their AI solution. So again, the key thing I want to highlight here from a data building block side is that they're not separate. They need to go hand in hand. When you're building your AI strategy, you need to be able to benchmark it against your data strategy and vice versa. Looking at the second type of building blocks that I want to talk about today, I want to quickly take a moment to define strategy. Oftentimes, like I said before, AI is a difficult thing with clients to define. Strategy is also a difficult thing to define for a lot of people. With the context of this presentation, when I talk about strategy, I'm talking about the ability for an organization or a team to develop a vision and an action plan to do something. And that something can be to solve a problem, or it could be to create a new service or a new solution. So an AI strategy is quite easily defined as the ability to build an action plan to use AI to do something. What that something is tailored to the organization as they define AI. That's actually a great segue to the story that I wanted to talk about here with a client I worked with. So we were brought in to review and assess the AI vision that a company had built for itself. So again, this was another very mature organization that has been around for many years. It's quite large, and it has a lot of different people involved in it across a lot of different departments. Similarly, this organization wanted to have a core AI guiding principle and a core AI vision that they were going to structure all of their future products and initiatives off. This is beneficial for organizations to do because it allows them to benchmark and evaluate future projects to say, hey, is it aligned to our underlying AI vision and our AI guiding principles? Now, what we recognized when we joined this organization is because it has so many different people, each one of those people were defining and understanding AI differently. For some of them, it was very exploratory, it was very innovation driven, but for some of them, it was very problem focused. All they wanted AI to do was to solve very specific problems that they were facing. Now, when you have different understandings of AI, to have an agreed upon vision is very difficult. So our entire responsibility on this engagement was being the people manager on the client side. It was just being that bridge or between different people to say, hey, you understand AI to be this, you understand AI to be this. Like, where is the common ground we can meet on, so that when we go to the market or when we go to the people actually developing the solution, we're not telling them different things. Again, this seems very business focused and very aspirational, but it's important for any organization to have their AI vision, because if they don't, when they're looking to benchmark the financial viability of a product, or when they're looking to understand the long-term costs associated to a product. They need to be able to say, hey, it's actually meeting our AI vision, so it's more digestible that way. So the key takeaway from this, that entire engagement was the solutioning, the technology, the data was not a big blocker for this organization. It was the people component. The people were not able to align on what they wanted AI to mean, and thus what they wanted AI to do. So building out the strategy building blocks on, hey, here's our modernization strategy, or here is how we're going to work with some fintech players in the market, or here's how we're going to do XYZ within the context of AI and our vision around that is really important. I've actually built an AI strategy playbook that I use the analogy of building a house. So when you look at the building blocks, when you look at your AI organization, the analogy I use here is this should be exactly like you are building a house, where you need to plan, you need to build, and then you actually need to move in. I can actually bring up the strategy quickly, and I'll showcase it to you guys. So, like I mentioned before, the analogy of building the house is just taking the different steps you would have of, hey, having a blueprint for a house, or identifying who the homeowner is and the work plan is, similar to how you should build your AI strategy, which is your blueprint is going to be your action plan, your vision, your guiding principles. Your homeowners are your change champions. Who are the people that when you deploy AI, you want them to be touting it to you across the entire organization? The people that will inspire people, that will encourage them to take the learning gap, to address the fears. Those are all key components of your planning phase of your strategy. Building it is, like I mentioned on this slide here, your plumbing, your walls. Your plumbing would be like your data. How do you source and manage your data? And linking your AI strategy to your data strategy. Building your walls is building your tech strategy. How do you ensure that you have the appropriate on-prem or cloud environment that is going to support your AI solution? How do you ensure that you are using the right reporting, the right software, the right hardware to enable your developers, your data scientists, your whoever to actually build your AI products? Keeping a roof over your head, this, as an FYI to everyone, this strategy is linked to or connected to my LinkedIn, so you can definitely download a copy of it there. But keeping a roof over your head is all around making sure that you have a proven roadmap, managing the hype with the value, making sure that your first use case, as I mentioned before, is going to be successful. And then, of course, the last phase is your move-in. People oftentimes forget about the importance of this in any AI strategy or any of your AI building blocks, because if you build an amazing product, but your team either is not aware about it, or if your organization is not aware about it, you lose momentum there. Or if you build a product that is simply automating a particular service without any risk to job loss, but you haven't done the appropriate socialization on how that impacts the people around, you are going to lose a lot of momentum on your AI strategy. So this is, again, the analogy here is managing your housewarming and growing your landscape. Managing your housewarming here is, like I said, how do you plan to not only turn on the lights and say you've rolled out a new AI product, but how do you plan on rolling it out across your organization? How do you plan on continuing an active dialogue and active conversation with everyone across your organization on their fears around AI, their aspirations around AI? And then how do you look to the future? How do you ensure that your next product can be proven and it can build off the foundation of what you have right now and take on additional complexity and manage the risks associated with that? So this is that the strategy view, the reason I wanted to showcase that to you all is really to highlight that your strategy building blocks again, they're not product focused, but that they're setting you up for success when you actually roll out your product. Typically, how I do this with a lot of clients is that we usually like go in with leading crunchy questions is what we call it. The ability to categorize your aspirations against kind of whether it's descriptive, diagnostic, or prescriptive or predictive questions on what do we want to do here and why do we want to do it. So again, I just want to jump back once more time to the AI building block slide because this really ties to my wrap-up scenario. The point I want to make through this entire presentation is that if you focus on one set of building blocks, you will really be doing a disservice to everything else within your organization. If you are, I've used this example before, but if you are a risk-adverse organization and you build a solution without appropriately acknowledging the impacts across people, process, and strategy, you will face a lot of backlash. We've seen it with many clients, and it's oftentimes why we see a lot of AI products and AI strategies fail, because they don't have that holistic view of what they want AI to do and how they're going to address it and define it across the different building blocks. Making sure that you can test and prove AI is just as important as making sure that you have the foundation in which to do it. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to take questions from anyone on the line. Yeah, happy to deep dive on any other building blocks that you may see.
Thank you. That was great. That was fabulous. I was really interested in how you presented the topic of coming up with an AI strategy and using the concept of building blocks. So we all familiar with what building blocks are, particularly as it comes together to construct a house, or for this in this case, an AI solution. And the fundamental building blocks that we had identified, the different areas, and within each area, the individual blocks, if I could use the term continuing forward, I really liked how it all came together. And this seems to be quite captivating. The idea seems to be quite captivating that in order to come up with an AI solution, there are several things that need to be considered. And as an organization, are you considering all of those? Are you worrying about concerns around the capabilities that need to exist and whether those capabilities are present in-house or not? If not, would you be acquiring them from outside? So these are all questions that the organization needs to be asking, but before they can ask those questions, they need to realize what do they have and what do they not have. Yeah, thank you for that. It's pretty cool. What I'm going to do is open up the first question. So we have a number of questions pouring in on our YouTube channel asking several things. So let me pull them up one by one. Okay, the first question is, how do you differentiate between data strategy and data governance? Is one part of the other? So this pertains to, I believe, the slide that you had on the data building block where you talked about the strategy, data governance. Could you give your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so data strategy and data governance. So data governance is how you are specifically regulating your data management across those different categories. So how you want to define those categories, whether they're metadata, data lifecycle, privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Your data strategy is similar to how I was defining like strategy in general, which is your action plan. So I want to do X, Y, Z with my data. That is your data strategy. That is your kind of vision and goal with your data. How you want to do that and how you organize that would be more related to the data governance here. So I want to achieve X, Y, Z strategy through the actioning of maturing my metadata or through the action of maturing my data quality. Those are the different components of your data governance to achieve a more broader data strategy.
Interesting. And we had a response question as well from our YouTube audience. So I would say data strategy is broader than data governance.
Oh,
would you concur with this statement?
Exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah. So just to reiterate myself here, strategy is your action plan, game plan. So a data strategy is I want to do something with my data. I want to improve it in some way to achieve some kind of outcome. The data governance is a little bit more of the double clicks of how are you going to achieve your data strategy.
Okay, that's interesting. And we have another question. So are there specific measures or steps that you can take that you would refer to when deciding on the building blocks to prioritize an organization's product strategy when it doesn't align to the AI strategy? So I guess what the question that is being asked is, so you have a product strategy, and well, firstly you have an organization strategy, and then from that organization strategy come up with different functional strategies, right? You have a product strategy, and then you had an AI strategy and a technology strategy, and so on and so forth, the sales strategy. So if your product strategy does not align to the AI strategy, could the building block approach that you have presented, that you have shared with all of us, could that be used to better align both the product strategy and the AI strategy?
So this question, it brings up and it highlights actually a really good point with the fact is like an organization is comprised of multiple different strategies. A strategy on how they want to manage their talent, a strategy on how they want to grow as an organization, a strategy on how they want to adopt AI. So if those strategies are in conflict with each other, you have a problem because you're essentially telling your people and your processes to do two different things. So in this specific question here, it says, what do you do if your organization's product strategy doesn't align with their AI strategy? You need to have a point of reckoning here. You need to be able to, I would argue you need to align your AI strategy to your organization strategy. Or if this is like a product strategy, like which is we want to be super waterfall or we want to be very agile with how we manage our products, that needs to shift to how you're developing your AI strategy.
Okay, so you would say the product strategy influences the AI strategy. The AI strategy should be aligned correspondingly. Is that correct?
It comes down to the perspective of the organization. If you want to be top down, then you have your organizational strategy, which is trickling down and changing your AI strategy, which is changing your product strategy.
Okay.
Or you could be more bottom up and say, hey, this is how we deliver our products, which is going to impact our AI strategy, which should impact our organization. I don't often see that that kind of perspective, but it is an option.
Yeah. It could be when they're chasing the trend. So if there are phenomena which are happening in the industry, and those could be used to inspire, to provide feedback to how the organization strategy needs to be adjusted or rethought of.
That's a fair point because I would say, as we saw many organizations a few years ago shift to like digital, there was the shift on how they developed their products, which was less waterfall historically and now to be more agile, which required a shift in the organization strategy on how they are funding products. So shifting to, hey, we're going to go big bang to, okay, well, let's shift our financial models to be more MVP, impacts the overall org strategy, which is that's a good point. Yes.
Okay, good. I had some questions as well that I wish to ask. So, what would you say the biggest hurdle that you have seen organizations typically face when trying to scale such enterprise solutions?
So there's two big hurdles I typically see here. One is the hype around AI makes it very confusing. So people either have unrealistic expectations or there is just a certain apprehension around AI. So when you're looking to scale it and impact departments outside of, let's say, the scope of an MVP or POC, people have fears and apprehensions that need to be addressed. And that kind of ties quite nicely into the second part here, which is the people management of AI is really not adequately addressed enough right now. So people need a lot of education. For many people across an organization, AI is not well known or well understood. So to do the socialization of saying, hey, job loss is not applicable here, or hey, we're following all your guidelines around data privacy, or sorry, consumer privacy, or saying, hey, here's how you need to actually continue to train and improve upon the model. That's very lacking right now because people spend the money to build out a POC. They say, hey, this flashy solution works, but they don't set themselves up for success to say, hey, this is going to be run the operations team that will need to grow this and mature this and continue to improve the model.
Coming back to the AI building blocks, would these be equally applicable across all organizations? Or is it something that would be variable across organization to organization? And if so, how do you go about identifying AI building blocks and prioritizing the organizations?
Yeah, it goes back to that process that I was going through before, which is your AI building blocks. The list I showed you before is not exhaustive, but it also doesn't mean that you need to prioritize each one the same. And it's not to say that you don't need to add or remove where applicable. It ultimately comes down to what you're looking from your AI strategy, which is how you define AI. If you define AI as, hey, we're going to use AI to, let's just say across the organization, we're going to focus on AI on just automation, not exploratory. Let's just automate the very low-hanging fruits processes here. You may not necessarily need the most mature data governance structure in place there. I would argue you always need to have good data maturity when you're doing AI, but you may not need enterprise data governance here because you're just doing very focused, repeatable, automated solutions. You also may not have to do a lot of people management because it's, again, low-hanging fruit. People aren't necessarily concerned about that. But when you're shifting your AI definition and your AI strategy, you need to be able to look at the building blocks accordingly and say, hey, to make this work, we're going to need a big focus on governance here. We're going to need a much bigger focus on our ecosystem play or our tech environment play here.
Okay, interesting. How do you deal with building blocks that are not as appealing as other building blocks? So, for example, in an organization, I could imagine that certain building blocks would be perceived to be more valuable, both at a management level and as well as an individual level. Technical skills usually are a bit more sought after. They are given a lot more importance. They are usually hard to acquire, but equally important and necessary building blocks, for example, data governance, that might also be needed, but people don't really want to worry about data governance. So how do you deal with such situations where you have building blocks which are equally important, but are less, not given the same level of equitable priority?
Yeah, so this is a good question because this is where the benefit of the market hype around AI really comes into play. AI can really be used as a way to incentivize people to do things that they wouldn't have wanted to do or pay for in the past. So the example before I was using for a client that wanted an enterprise AI, they always should have had an enterprise data governance solution because they were a mature organization that had regulatory considerations. But AI was really the way we were able to inspire both the leadership level to make the big plunge into paying for a broader or more mature data governance practice. And it was also the kind of incentive for the organization to build a data steward community of assigning data ownership, because they could say, hey, if we have a problem with our AI product because it's not sourcing data correctly, we know exactly now who to point to, which was something in the past they were like, hey, why do we need data ownership? Like, who cares who's doing what with the data?
Interesting, interesting. So I guess I'll conclude the session with one final question. So what's next? Once the building blocks are identified, they are prioritized, they are highlighted as things being important, an organization needs to worry about it. You obviously have the playbook that would guide an organization as well. So what's next? What would then be happening in an organization? What is the handover? What comes next?
Again, good question here because, and I would encourage people to read the strategy playbook, but the what's next is really increasing the complexity. I mentioned in the presentation that the most important thing you want for your first AI solution is that it works. It doesn't have to be complicated, it just needs to work. Once you're able to prove that it works, then you can start taking on more exploratory things, being able to try more out there products that maybe your organization wasn't comfortable with in the past. So maybe saying, hey, let's see if we can embed like a chat bot in our contact in our call center, which is something you may have been risk adverse to before because, hey, most chatbots don't work, or you're not comfortable with the current maturity of natural language processing. That's a step you can now take. It's being willing to take more risky, more innovative based AI use cases is what would be your next step. But as long as you have that foundation of, hey, we are comfortable that our people are good with this risk, we are comfortable that we have the data to take on this more complex use cases, that we have the tech to deliver this, and that we have the processes needs to manage this.
Interesting, interesting. So thank you, Calvin. This was amazing. I really enjoyed the talk. I was not familiar with the concept of building blocks. Well, I am familiar with the concept of building blocks, but how it to coming up with an AI strategy for an organization and how they could use these AI building blocks to jump into an area that they might have been hesitant in going into just because of the complexity and the nuances and the lack of understanding of what this world looks like, I believe is a very helpful guide for them. It was interesting to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure that the audience, I mean, we have comments like great session, so the audience did indeed appreciate what you shared with everyone.
Perfect. Happy to talk.
Great, great. Thank you. And thank you to our audience for coming and joining us live, as well as individuals who will be viewing these videos later on. Please do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. We really could use the support, and this would allow us to bring more of these sessions in the coming weeks and months. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.